Brett, do you have any top tips for performing one's best on test day?
Yeah. Well, I think what you hinted at earlier, and you can absolutely talk to the inner game. So we talked about that outer game and the inner game, and I would say they're equally important, right? So for the outer game would be the X's and O's. Can you solve for X? Can you find the probability of blah, 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 blah? Do you know subject-verb agreement for sentence correction questions and things like that? So you absolutely have to study all of that stuff. Let's talk about some tips for that outer game. I would say two things. One, there are a lot of non-standard or non-traditional strategies of solving all of the different question types. Right? So I talk about a success triad. Think about sort of the three component parts of doing well on these exams. You have the content you have to learn. Think of it as like a Venn diagram, right? You're going to have to learn some of that stuff when you're preparing for these exams. You have the content you have to learn to solve for X, learn subject-verb agreement, whatever. You have the practice. At the end of the day, you have to practice. If you're learning to play golf, you got to go to the driving range and hit a whole bunch of balls. With feedback, by the way, that's a missing piece, right? You can't just wonder why your ball's slicing off into the woods every time on the first tee. Somebody's got to look at your swing and tell you what's wrong. So if you're not getting the score you need, get some help, but that's the practice component. So you have to learn some stuff. You absolutely have to practice it. But then strategy is that third piece of the pie. And that strategy piece matters. It's what helps you get right answers more efficiently, more accurately, avoid traps, all of that type of stuff. And especially on the quant side, Bara had talked about data sufficiency. Guys, there are ways of coming at these questions in non-traditional ways. I always tell my students, your goal is not to make your high school math teacher happy. Your goal is to get a right answer on question number 7. And if you can get a right answer on question number 7 in a non-traditional way faster, do that. Because as much as we're saying, hey, grow your brain and it's going to help you on day 1 of business school, that's all true. But if you can find the right answer to question number 7 in a minute instead of 2.5 minutes, do that. So get with somebody who can teach you some of these non-traditional strategies. The second thing I would say is remember that these are reasoning tests. On the GMAT specifically, the executive assessment is the same way. It is called the quantitative reasoning section, the verbal reasoning section, the integrated reasoning section. Data Insights doesn't have reasoning in it, but it's all reasoning based. It's not just a math test. So the mindset you come to the exam with matters in terms of how you're going to prepare and how you're looking at questions on test day, and it's going to translate to right answers. There are some questions that you can get right answers by reasoning your way to a right answer. It's not all memorizing a bunch of formulas. If it was, I could give you a cheat sheet of the 50 most important math formulas to know for the GMAT. You might have to know a couple of formulas, but mostly it's reasoning your way to right answers on the verbal side as well. And so sort of come at it with that mindset. I remember when I first started my career in test prep years ago, going on almost 20 years ago. I guess it was when I first started Dominate Test Prep in 2010. I had a Duke grad come to me wanting some help with the GMAT. And she goes, I am a Duke engineer. I graduated with an engineering degree. I've worked in engineering for a couple of years. I'm ready to go back to business school. Why can't I do GMAT math? I'm good at math. Like I'm a quant person. And I said, because GMAT math isn't Duke math. It's not engineering math. It's not a math test. There's some math you have to know, but let's look at the reasoning side of it. Let's learn data sufficiency. Let's come at questions in a slightly different way. And the light bulb sort of went on. She got a great score. And so that would be my tip sort of for the outer game type of approach to your prep. But then the inner game, guys, you can learn all the X's and O's, solving for X, all of this type of stuff. But on test day, or you could probably speak to this as well, what's your anxiety level? What's your perspective if you go into the exam? And I'll just touch on this piece for a moment. Perspective matters. If you build this exam up to be life or death, if your self-worth rides on your GMAT score, we got problems because now you're putting undue pressure on yourself. No, pressure is a privilege. Pressure, a little bit of nerves, anxiety, not anxiety, a little bit of nerves, a little bit of butterflies. I'm a tennis player, right? I feel the butterflies before a big tennis match. It shows I'm ready. It shows I've treated it seriously. But the second that first serve comes my way and I'm in the point, okay, that goes away. Now I'm just in it. Now I'm just competing, right? That's what you want to have happen on test day is it matters. I want to go to business school. But Bar and I were talking about this offline before we hit record. I live in East Tennessee. right at the edge of Hurricane Helene and all the floods and all the damage and stuff like that. I was helping at a house shoveling out mud from these people's houses that was just destroyed, trying to help them get back into their home. And there's just this odor in the air, right? And these people pull up. This is maybe a little bit more serious than you guys signed up for on this call, but this is real life, right? So all of a sudden these people in a truck pulled up and they walk down the banks of the river, walk across the water to this little island and release a cadaver dog. And they ended up finding a body there. And these people whose homes, the home's just destroyed. That's like the important stuff, guys. I mean, that's life. Your GMAT score matters, but there's other stuff in life that also matters. So have some perspective. If you woke up this morning with, if you're going to eat three balanced meals today, and you've got breath, air in your lungs, and the world's going to go on tomorrow, whether you get your GMAT score or not. Guess what you can do? You can retake the exam. What's the worst thing that's going to happen if you don't get a 90th percentile GMAT score on your first attempt? Go back to the drawing board, figure it out, study a little bit more, take it again. Go to law school instead. There are options, there are options for you in life. The very fact that you're thinking about going to business school means you're already going to be in the top 10% of people worldwide who, are growing up eating a cup of rice for their meal for the entire day and couldn't even graduate elementary school because they're having to help in the rice fields. So I would just tell my students, have a little perspective heading in this thing and bringing it back to why that's important, not because I'm trying to give some sort of a lecture or get off on a soapbox, but because it actually translates to test day. If you take the pressure off of yourself a little bit, create a little bit of breathing room for yourself in terms of the results on test day, and all of a sudden the results on test day aren't the most important thing in the entire world, guess what actually happens? You actually perform better. You actually have clarity of thought. You aren't so stressed out that you can't think clearly, and you read the reading comprehension passage, which is the first thing you often do on verbal on the executive assessment, and you're 5 minutes into the exam and are freaking out because you have no idea what you just read and time's ticking away. Your thought process is a lot clearer, guys, if you have the right perspective on these exams.